Project, Francis Gurry from WIPO, and Vint Cerf. And now to game changers in 20 years from now. Our remote moderators are Raquel Gatto from the Brazil chapter and Vidya Paselk at the Internet Society. And our moderator for the session itself is Bill Graham. Bill is an independent consultant based in Ottawa, Canada, and a member of the ICANN Board of Directors. Bill worked with the Internet Society from 2007 to 2011, where he was instrumental in securing the Internet Society's engagement with a wide range of international organizations where there are discussions of Internet policy and technical issues. Before joining the Internet Society, Bill was Director of International Telecommunications Policy and Coordination in the Canadian government. Bill was also one of the first people I met when I started working with the Internet Society in 2011. He continues to be a tremendous resource, and so it's a privilege to introduce him today. Without further ado, I turn it over to Bill and our dynamic participants for a thought-provoking and perhaps even provocative conversation.
Thank you very much, Terrell, and thank you all for coming today. This is the closing plenary entitled Game Changers, and I think we've got a very top-flight panel for us across a range of ages and experiences across all regions of the world to bring their views as to what we might be looking at when we have the 40th anniversary of the Internet Society 20 years from now. We've asked them to prepare some brief remarks, and we'll walk through those first, and then we'll get to the main item of the agenda, which is to have some discussion with you in the audience, with our remote participants, and among the panelists themselves. So I want to start the session quite quickly here by introducing our distinguished panel. I really do not have time to do justice to each of their accomplishments, so I'll be very, very brief, and I urge you to review their full biographies on the Global INET website. I think I'll do this alphabetically, so I'll start with Titi Akinsanmi. She is an academic serving as a researcher, lecturer, and prospective PhD candidate with the Link Center at the University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, South Africa. She has experience and expertise as a strategist, activist, and project manager in policy research and development, focused on the Internet ecosystem and its governance, the Knowledge Society, ICTs for D, universal access, and service provision. We also have David Appasamy. Until recently, David was executive director of the Madura microfinance company. He has been co-chair of the International Chamber of Commerce Task Force on Internet and Telecommunications Infrastructure and Services and the Commission on the Digital Economy. Maria Casey is joining us from Vodafone Ireland, where she works in the Corporate Security Department, focusing on ensuring customer data security, and she has a strong focus on privacy and security awareness. Then we have Jayantha Fernando, who's director and legal advisor at the ICT Agency of Sri Lanka. He is an expert in Internet law and policy, and he's pioneered and given leadership to the ICT legal policy reform as well as Internet governance processes in Sri Lanka for over 15 years. He's also been active in a range of international organizations. Then on my right here we have Dr. Demi Getschko. Demi is a board member and Internet advisor of CGI.br. He is CEO of NIC.br and vice president of the ISOC Brazil chapter. Demi has been involved in international networking since 1987, and he took part in the team that established the first internet connection to Brazil. We have Dr. Burt Kaliski, a senior vice president and chief technology officer of Verisign. He's responsible for the company's long-term technology vision. He's also the leader of Verisign Labs, which focuses on applied research, university collaboration, industry thought leadership, and intellectual property strategy. From Thailand, we have Kanchanasut. She is the director of the Internet Education and Research Laboratory at the Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok, where she is also a professor in computer science at the IT School of Engineering and Technology. And last but not least, we have Charles Mock. Charles is a unique individual who is active in civil society and in business circles, and also in political affairs in Hong Kong and internationally. Among other things, he is the founding chairman of the Internet Society of Hong Kong, and he writes extensively on technology, management, and public policy in a range of publications. So, with that introduction, I'd like to turn to the first of our four speakers, who will talk about their vision for the Internet in 2032. And I'd like to start with Titi Akinsanmi, please.
Thank you, Bill. A hearty good afternoon to everybody who's seated here and who somehow made it in. Before I start, where I come from, we firmly believe for you to be able to make sense of where you're headed to, you have to be able to take a good look at where you're coming from. For me, sitting here today brings a lot of memories. It's been 10 years since I made my debut on the international scene in this very same halls. 10 years of realizing that when I got into the internet ecosystem, there was a lot of confusion around identifying what exactly it was we were trying to do, from governance to the technology that all of a sudden faced us. And one of the things that I realized at that point, and which I was very active in, was ensuring that young people had a voice, not just in policy, but in the decision making. And I asked myself that 10 years down the line, has this changed? Yes, to some extent. And then I cast my mind forward to 2032, and I think about the child that I carry within me, who will be 20 in 2032, and I will be 52. Do I want my child to be engaged in the same conversations around policy making, around governance? Or would I expect to have created the right foundations for such a child to be able to engage in a constructive way in something that I expect to continue to be dynamic? So in engaging with the question, what are the game changers in 2032? I take a look at my present. One of the things I'm currently involved in is around the internet governance and trying to understand that entire confusing ecosystem where we are trying to fit literally an animal that does not fit any current mold in models of governance that have existed for so long and have not necessarily worked. And one of the things that I see happening in 2032 is this. One, on the policy level, to a certain extent, we will have some central governance of the internet. That's a given. People will argue with me otherwise. But looking at the way human beings are structured and the fact that the internet does not exist in its own space alone, but exists in a bigger vacuum, is the fact that policies and governance will be in place, centralized to some extent. But what excites me more is that there will be an alternative reality, literally, where people who would be labeled as dissents, as people who have refused to exist within certain confines, will thrive. And they will thrive in a particular way, in that the policies and the regulations will be in place. But because the internet is what it is, and because the ecosystem is so dynamic, it will continue to exist outside of those rules. So my point for where we are in terms of internet governance today is this, that yes, we can put policies in place. Yes, we can have arguments around what institutions should manage the internet. But more interesting is the fact that as we continue to have those discussions, the internet is moving ahead. By 2032, we will have young people. We will have a whole range of people who are so engaged with the technology that whether or not policy exists is likely irrelevant for them. On the second level is a question that I have. And while we were discussing this panel, I mentioned that I'm quite hesitant to be able to say by 2032, this is what will have happened. For all we know, the internet or some technology will have developed where we'll be in a place where all of a sudden we no longer exist as human beings, but we just engage as robots. It's not impossible. We've seen movies about it. If you cast your mind back to 20, 30, 40 years ago, we had movies where they said that you'll be able to engage with people who are not in the same room with you. We have virtual presence all of a sudden. I remember that yesterday we had a conversation around being able to order something in India and getting it sent to you via the internet immediately, and you can actually eat it. It was a mango. Somebody will talk more about that. But what I'd like to see in 2032, what I hope will be in place, is a system where rights, particularly internet rights, are being respected. Respected not because the laws have changed, but because there's more respect for them, because we've been able to build a generation that respects those rights. On the next level that I see, and I think finally, because I know I have just 5 minutes, is on the concept of the tension that will exist even more between physical geographical jurisdictions and sovereignty, and getting to a place where the question is no longer what country are you from. In my case, I will answer Nigeria. Confused a bit because I live in South Africa, and possibly maybe I would have changed nationality again by then. But the answer will no longer be I'm a Nigerian, or I'm a South African, or I'm from Switzerland, or I'm an American citizen. But the answer would be to a different kind of question. What are you engaged in? It'll be, oh, I belong to the Facebook community, or I'm of the thinking that's associated with this other place. And I'm using examples that we have now. A place where it's no longer about your nationality, but more about what you engage in on the internet. I think that tension will exist so much so that, to some extent, you'll have states that will exist outside of the normal space of the internet. But more so is that you'll have a generation of people who see themselves as internet citizens and not necessarily as one nationality in one physical space. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Titi. Now turning to Jayantha and asking him to speak from his experience.
Thank you, Bill. Actually, I would like to, like Titi said, I would also like to begin by going back several years and thank ISOC who trained us through the networking workshop events going back 10 years ago that helped us to become advocates of law and policy reform in our respective countries. So I would begin by commending ISOC, its board of trustees, together with its CEO and its fantastic team, for putting together such an amazing, excellent event to celebrate the 20th anniversary of ISOC. We have heard over the last days that predicting the future is notoriously difficult. While technology trends may be easier to predict, applications and reactions of users and communities will be much more difficult to predict. In this context, from a developing country and a regulatory government perspective, I would say that the role of government and policymakers may be even harder to predict in the next 20 years because in most cases, governments all over the world will tend to merely react to social economic requirements and changes rather than being proactive or being more responsive to them. We live in an era, this kind of era today, where policy and law changes are traditionally behind technology and innovation, and that is a universal assumption. The challenges for the future is how well governments and reform efforts would respond to much faster evolution of technology and innovation than what we see today. Looking at the next 20 years and speaking from a developing South Asian perspective and coming from a region with a significant ongoing investment towards ICT development and e-government applications, I feel that governments and policymakers globally will be compelled to play a more significant role in connecting and empowering people with internet and associated tools and technologies. Otherwise, they will be left behind and will not be part of the information society that we are talking of. We heard from many speakers that the broadband gap is bigger than the digital divide, and that more than 2/3 of the world's people don't have access to broadband, let alone the internet. I see this as a challenge for governments and policymakers, and how they respond to this challenge will shape the internet in the next 20 years. In order to meet this connectivity challenge, which I would like to call the connectivity challenge, I feel that governments globally will be compelled to adopt the multi-stakeholder model in their respective countries to ensure that their countries get the best when utilizing public funds to connect everybody. So technicians, academia, private sector, civil society, and others will have a more significant role in their respective countries to contribute towards ICT development and policy reform efforts than what we see at present. That's my hope. Such stakeholders will be able to help governments build localized applications at a significant lower cost to enable a more effective and efficient use of technology, covering sectors such as health, education, and public utilities. The effective use of technology in these sectors will define the role of governments in their respective societies in the next 20 years to come. To cite an example in my own country, many of the local content, internet content that we see spread across the rural communities, and those tools which empower less able people to access the internet. For example, the Braille to text and the text to Braille software that help disabled blind people access the internet were all developed not by government but by local stakeholders, academia, the private sector, and civil society groups. So I would think that it may be prudent to project the multi-stakeholder model in this context so that this model will become more sustainable within developing countries as well in the future. As we increase the penetration of global internet in the next decade, we may also see government reactions becoming more subtle. And also, they will be compelled to be more transparent because people who are connected will be asking them to do so. With more and more people and segments of society using social networking tools and other empowerments, governments will be compelled to use the same tools to respond and address the needs of their respective societies. They can't use the traditional ways of communicating with their people. In the next 20 years, hopefully, with greater connectivity, governments will be compelled, in my view, to focus even more on safer and more secure internet for all users, including children. And I feel this is an area where the government's role will have to be significantly present in defining the roadmap for the internet going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayantha. That's certainly thought-provoking about the role of governments in the multi-stakeholder model. Now, Charles Mock, please.
Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If we look 20 years forward, what do we see? Where are the game changers? These are the questions posed to our panel, and they're not easy to answer, but they're easy to answer in the sense that you wouldn't know if I were totally wrong, because it will take 20 years to prove, and by then you would not remember what I have said. Actually, at 68, I think everyone should report our age 20 years from now. I may not be around anymore anyway. But really, when I look at these questions, the first thing I asked myself was, is the development of the internet so predictable? I tend to think not. But maybe the game changers themselves or the key trends are easier to spot, and maybe we can talk about that. And sometimes but on the other hand, sometimes we may not know in advance where these game changers may really lead us to. To begin, I see conflicts. Conflicts between governments and those in society with power, from political power to economic and social, cultural powers, on the one hand, with the common average people who uses the internet, and especially the younger generation who are not only growing up with the internet, but literally born with the internet. The struggle for the control of the internet between them as a set of technological tools, as an environment, as a lifestyle will intensify greatly. It's obvious that governments around the world, and increasingly we're not only talking about the authoritative, totalitarian governments, regimes in the world, but more and more even Western democracies are trying to legalize control that they want to impose on the internet, starting with surveillance in the greatest measures. Privacy and security is one of the key battlefields, but copyright is another. As we speak now in Geneva, back home in Hong Kong, where I came from, netizens, especially youngsters and artists, are organizing themselves in unprecedented ways to oppose government legislative attempts to strengthen copyright enforcement in the digital world, all dressed in the good list of protecting the creative environment, but without providing exemption for recreation or parody or satirical treatment on copyrighted works. Such opposition was unexpected in scale or scope by our government, to say the least. And I also use Hong Kong, my hometown, as an example for this coming conflicts between the wish for more control by the authorities and the powerful businesses on the one hand, and the urge for more freedom by internet users. Hong Kong is in a particularly unique crossroads situation because even as a part of the People's Republic of China, we have an advanced, affordable, almost ubiquitous environment for the internet and telecommunications usage, especially mobile, where our access to content is as free as anywhere else in the world, without any filtering. Yet right across the border, the situation would be totally different, with the most widespread technologically and operationally advanced and functional great firewall in the world for content filtering. And indeed, many governments do have so much to learn from China, and many have openly said so that they want to. So for us in Hong Kong, not one moment passed that we don't look over our shoulders to watch what might be coming, when and where the next clampdown might occur. We know the free flow of information is our biggest current asset, but and now almost suddenly, our young internet users have learned to use the internet as a tool to defend their rights, much in the same ways as the young people have been doing so in Egypt and other places. But if we look again at the situation across the border from Hong Kong into the mainland China, here's where the real contradiction lies. You may think that it is still a land isolated with this powerful and efficient and effective firewall. Yes and no. The reality is that people there, the biggest population of internet users in the world in any country, have actually more freedom and access to information than they ever had before, even with the firewall, because they do have the internet. Most do not get arrested for speaking out their minds, and I'm not saying that in order to help defend the rulers. If anything, the Chinese internet users still have a choice to circumvent the firewall if they choose to, and they are making changes to their society using the internet in ways unseen before. Just as people are more alike one another than they are not all across the world, governments are probably also alike when it comes to the will to control, especially on things that they worry to be out of control. So in Hong Kong and in mainland China, I think we have a front row seat to witness these game changers in the next 20 years. The greatest technology to control the internet and the people on it, and the greatest will from the people to stop these interventions, using yet many of the same technologies to circumvent and counter. These will be where the greatest innovation may probably take place, and I'm not talking about just the security software or circumvention tools. They can also be the next generation of social media platforms that will allow people to share and get organized more easily on the different levels. So with these game changers, where will we be in 2032? My greatest hope will be that the internet of tomorrow will withstand governmental interference and continue to be governed, as well as function and operate relatively free from governmental and inter- or intra-governmental control. And that the internet users, those who are very young today, who will in 20 years' time become the leaders, will develop into truly responsible leaders for the internet. But that's only my hope, but I'm not sure whether I can really call that a prediction, because I still harbor an opposite worry that the governments of the world may become more successful in exerting their control and influence. And I will close with one example. While we marvel at the convenience and benefits of Twitter as a micro-blogging tool, The Twitter copycats in China called Weibo have innovated way beyond Twitter in terms of functionalities, user-friendliness, and integration with mobile cameras and other devices. Yes, the government has also established a very closely monitored control mechanism on its user-created content. Yet, users and dissidents share information relatively freely on these platforms. And I guess I can use the same 11-minute rule that our copyright friends were talking about in the previous panel about the time it takes for a program to be pirated on the net. There's also the 11-minute rule, probably, for dissidents sharing information before the content were removed by the censors. And even with these little changes, they are making great social changes. So if that's possible behind the Great Firewall, I think we have reasons to be a little bit more optimistic about 2032 than we have to be pessimistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for that very interesting talk and those excellent examples. Demi, can I invite you to speak now?
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everybody. It's really a great pleasure and great honor to be in this event with all these pioneers and all these people here. And it will be very embarrassing to try to add something on that, but I'm not good on prophesying anyway. But I'll try to make some points and maybe some thoughts about where we are going. When I was asked 10 years ago about what will be the future of the Internet, at that time I said, I suppose, I hope that the Internet will disappear in a way that we will not think about the Internet. We will use the applications over the net, but no one will think about it. More or less like it happened with electricity. No one deals with if it's 60 hertz or 50 hertz, or if you just plug your device. Sometimes with problems with the plugs are different from country to country, but if you get the correct plug, you can plug your device and your device will be working. Then I think I will try to stress some points, some strengths of the net, some points we have to defend, and some points we have to try to avoid to have the network going forward in a good shape until the next 20 years. As we heard Professor Kleinrock, for example, with a good, very exciting examples of Nikola Tesla in predicting the future. We're not trying to compare and do anything like that. Anyway, there are two strengths that, in my opinion, is very important for keeping the Internet as it is now and has evolved until now. One is the technical conception of the network, a set of thousands of independent networks that cooperates in a voluntary base and without strong coordination. This is a real strength of the net, and I hope we can keep the net unite on that. The second strength I really want to stress is there is really the thing we call the Internet community. And this strange thing, the Internet community, makes the Internet to defend itself against bad ideas, against weak implementations, against walled software or walled implementations. In some way, this Internet community exists, and it really protects the network. I can go forward with two things that I think we have to maintain. From the technical point of view, it's important to keep the core of the network simple, not to put loads at the core, because this makes the network to be scalable. And also we have to keep the net neutral, to struggle for the net neutrality. It's a very difficult concept. Of course, it's impossible to deal with it in a short speech, but we have to pay attention to that. Two things we have to prevent. This is more or less come from experience in my own country, but we have seen these years a plethora of propositions of new local cyber laws, something like that. Many of these laws are very well intended, But as all of you, we knows, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Then the good intentions of the law does not justify the hurry to have these new laws implemented. I used to cite a Latin phrase, say festina lente, or make the haste slowly. Don't hurry to have this in place. The other point I have to take your attention, try to prevent, is the regulation or the over-regulation of the network. The regulation of the new things will inhibit innovation, and innovation is very important to the internet. Finally, I will use some words of Machiavelli in The Prince, that was written 500 years ago, that can explain more or less the struggle we see actually between all the new models. Then I will read rapidly that. It ought to be remembered that there is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. Because the innovator asks for enemies, all those who have done well under the old conditions, and lukewarm defenders in those who may do well under the new conditions. The coolness arises partly from the fear of the opponents who have the laws in their side, and partly from the incredulity of men who do not really believe on new things until they have had a long experience on that. This is from 500 years ago, but I think it applies yet to the network. Thank you.
Thank you, Demi. Well, so far, I think the commonality among everyone is that they're all very reluctant to go out too far on a limb about what the internet will look like in 2032. But there are some common themes there. The need to keep the internet open and free, the tension that exists between attempts to regulate the internet and to do good things through regulation and legislation that threaten the neutrality of the core, and also some predictions that many of the key factors that shape the future of the internet in 20 years will be arising from the tension between the desire of people to innovate and use the internet to expand their freedom, and the concerns of government to protect their citizenry, but also to control the discourse on the internet. So I'd like to thank our first four speakers, and then move quickly to the next four before we open up for discussion. So I think David Appasamy, you will lead off this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. As I saw the subject that was given to us, Game Changers, the internet 20 years from now, it struck me that it would be futile to look at any one application or tool that would really change the game. In reality, the internet itself is the game changer. And as the saying goes, I don't think we've seen anything yet. Because I foresee that 20 years from now, when you look at the context of India, we will have a more equitable and corruption-free society because of the internet. Now, that's saying a lot. We're talking about 1.2 billion people. We're talking about a fairly high level of corruption. We're talking about 400 million people who are not, reached by banks or any proper service. But 20 years from now, in India, we will not be measuring and discussing the digital divide, but instead, we will be analyzing the level of digital engagement of citizens. And that will be the key to empowerment. That essentially is what will make a difference. Every citizen will have a digital identity, thanks to the Unique Identity Authority of India, which is already going about setting up that identity. It is a current initiative, but it's expected to be completed in 3 years, and we will see its full fruit 20 years from now. Because of the UIDA, and every citizen's digital identity, everyone will have a bank account linked to it, bringing about financial inclusion. Those 400 million people out in the wilderness, when it comes to the banking system, will be very much part of it. All funds, payments, and salaries will be transferred directly, electronically into citizens' accounts. Social services will be possible because everybody is identifiable and reachable. We will have unemployment benefits. You will have databases so people can be pointed towards jobs in any part of the country. When we're talking about 1.2 billion people, we're talking about a country 2/3 the size of Australia, with every state the size of a country in Europe. So we're talking about tremendous reach that will be made possible by the internet. Citizens' digital IDs will be linked to electronic medical health records, which in turn will be mapped to the closest hospitals, pharmacies, clinics. So no matter where people are, in rural or urban areas, they will have quality health care. Education and training will be available online, enabling people to choose what kind of training programs they would like, what kind of skills development programs they would like, so that they can enhance their abilities to get better jobs or become entrepreneurs. Now, we have 400 million people in India who are illiterate today, but 20 years from now, most of them will be literate because all children are going to schools today. So all of this will result in a paradigm shift in a number of ways. Corruption, as I said, will be drastically reduced as all financial transactions, whether personal or between a company and an individual or the government, takes place online with full transparency and online records for auditing. Citizens can make informed choices with regard to jobs, healthcare, education, and training, as a wealth of information is available online. Politics will once again shift towards capability, integrity, and accountability. And this is a very big point. And Indians, today, most Indians, because only a little over 100 million have access to the internet, the sense of identity is tied up with India, and in the rural areas with their state or even their own village. But 20 years from now, Indians, while retaining their national identity, will look at the world as their market, with greater access to information and distribution via the internet. Both professionals and entrepreneurs will offer their skills and products to global markets. So their identity will be Indian, but as Titi pointed out, their engagement will be what they do, but to a global canvas. There will also be sustained economic growth for people in rural areas as they integrate with the formal economy in many ways. Skilled craftsmen, such as weavers, the people who weave those gorgeous saris that you see, will no longer really have to go through a chain of people so that it's available in a store. A skilled weaver can become a brand in himself and make his products available online, not only to the Indian market, but to the global market. And this will be true of all skilled craftsmen, whether they are making traditional toys, they're making handicrafts, whatever it is. It will be available to the globe. Farmers with produce, and you've already heard about the mangoes. You take the example of mangoes. Mangoes will be made available by farmers online without having to deal with a cold chain or a supply chain. And areas that are well known for the kind of mangoes that they produce will be sought after online. Now, this means that areas can have a unique identity, like you have the Champagne region of France. Banganapalli can have a unique identity for the kind of mangoes that come from there. It becomes intellectual property. So also, Kanjivaram saris from the area of Kanjivaram, it will become something that even global markets may look at in terms of accessing. So as income opportunities from traditional farming or even from skills improves, people will elect to remain in the rural area because they can make a good living. But they will be integrated with the mainstream economy and with the global markets. Therefore, I believe that the internet remains the single most important game changer as a single overarching tool that will enable billions of people to reach their true potential, and by ensuring a productive, healthy life for people not only in India, but all over the world, and in terms of how they engage with it. In short, it will become the global nervous system for people to live and live productively. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for those predictions. Turning to Maria Casey now, please. Maria?
What I'd like to contribute to this discussion is a bit of a unique perspective, I think. As Bill said earlier, I'm a current employee of Vodafone. But as well as this, I'm also a young person. I'm after recently graduating from college in the last year, and also I'm an ambassador for ISOC. So genuinely somebody with an actual interest in governance. And also following on from Charles' suggestion earlier that we all list out our age in 20 years, I'll be 44, which makes me 24 now. So somebody actually recommended to me, instead of thinking that I'm the youngest, least experienced person on this panel, instead I actually should think that I'm the one with the freshest opinion. So I'm going to go from that angle. So when I was thinking about what I actually thought where we would be in 20 years, just thinking about what I wasn't actually sure myself. So trying to come up with some opinions, I just trying to let it roll around in my head for a while. And when I first arrived here in Geneva, there was an event that kind of got me thinking about this a lot more. That when I first got here, I met up with a friend of mine who just suggested he'd give me some tips and some advice about what I should see, what I should do when I'm around here. So I met him up listening just to see whatever he wanted to say. And it was about an hour. And this hour was so full of me, him, and his iPhone. His iPhone was probably the third guest at this table, because anytime he suggested somewhere I go, he brought up the picture of the location. He brought up a video of it, in audio, images, maps, transport information, everything. And this was when I realized that mobility is something that is going to change so much, so very, very much in the next 20 years. This concept of being there is a very, very different. It's going to be a very different concept in the future, because after we had our conversation and he asked me, so where do you want to go? I'll take you there. The thought kind of rolled around in my head of, well, I've kind of been everywhere already. Do I actually still have to go? And even when we went looking around, like, I know he took me to a church and I was looking at it going, yeah, I've seen this. I've seen it already. Okay, just cannot take another look at it. That's fine. That's good too. And it was such a strange concept of feeling that because I saw this on his iPhone in so many different ways, that I felt like I had generally been there already. And that is something I think that is going to proceed a lot in the near future, probably before 20 years. This concept of being there is something I'd also like to kind of expand on a little bit more. Now, like I said, I'm a recent graduate from college. So the concept of e-universities and online learning is something I'd like to talk about. That I believe in 20 years' time that e-universities won't be called e-universities. They'll just be called universities, because universities will, in fact, in the next few years, not only realize the benefit of being online, but they'll realize the power they have to stretch around the entire world, of being able to be mobile online to people who really want to come to their college, not because they don't have any other college in the area, making it available to everybody. Basically, the concept of giving mobility to the people who aren't mobile is a big concept. As well as something I'd like to talk that I met a woman this morning at the women's breakfast that we had here, and she told me this remarkable story that there's a project she knows that's being worked on at the moment that using cloud technologies, it's a project hopefully that will be working in the future, that a person with any disability at all will be able to log on to a machine and automatically download remote configurations to the computer or to whatever they're using that will automatically have assistive technologies. For example, it could be somebody who's just elderly who needs a bigger font that isn't capable of displaying, or somebody who needs more of a tactile interface. And this is one of the most remarkable stepping stones to somewhere that is definitely going to be in the future, to actually make the internet more equal, when we can all access it equally. Now, this idea of like an online identification, where anybody at all can log onto a machine and have a personalized version in front of them, is something I definitely think is going to be coming for all of us. We're in a world where we all have just a dummy terminal or a dummy phone, and that will become yours. We already have it with email, things like that. I definitely see this as something that is going to be tangible in the future, and we'll just take it for granted. Now, with this massive shift in mobility, something I think that is a more tangible goal that is actually going to happen that I foresee is for telecoms companies. Like I said, I work for Vodafone. So for revenue for telecoms companies are usually restricted to like phone calls, text messages, and data. They're the three big like money makers, if you want to say it that way. Well, I genuinely think in the next 20 years that it will be just data. And it's a big step to take, but I think the way we are going, that in 20 years' time, it will absolutely be just data. We have Skype, we have Viber, we even have Facebook chat. I know myself here that I've barely made a single phone call or text. I've been communicating online. So, and I also think that the mobile telecoms companies that are the first ones to take this step and to take a brave step to say this is what we're going to focus on is not only going to be a big game changer in the way we operate as a world as well, it's going to make remarkable changes for countries who will have access to data at this time. And I think it will make a very serious impact, especially in developing countries, because telecom companies will also realize the advantage and the benefit of expanding into these areas and investing in these areas. There's one final thought I'd just like to give on this concept of mobility. As I look around this room, actually, the amount of laptops that I see looking down at me is pretty remarkable. And it was something that I was thinking myself that when I came over here, originally from Ireland, when I was packing, I actually didn't even think to bring a laptop. And it was it didn't actually occur to me. And somebody said it to me that, oh, you should bring one. And I was like, oh, yeah, good idea. And I put it in my bag. And my bag got very heavy, so that kind of went straight back out. But I got here, and I have never once needed a laptop. And I haven't used it. I have a smartphone. And I think a smartphone is now at the point where it's been taken for granted in so many places. And they're getting cheaper and cheaper and more accessible. Again, for developing countries, this is also going to be the way further when they get more affordable, I guess. But for me, this is something that is definitely a big game changer right now, something so small as that you can have access to the world in the palm of your hand, definitely in terms of mobility. Thank you.
Thanks for that perspective, Maria. I'd like to ask Dr. Kanchanasut to speak to us now.
Okay. Thank you, Bill, and thanks for the challenge that you have given me. I'm just, I come from a country where there are a lot of fortune tellers, and people tend to listen to them, regardless whether they are accurate or not. So I'm hoping that you all listen to me, but you don't care about accuracy. But I would like to draw, a circle around me because I'm not just an internet user, or I'm not involving with the community type of work. So I like to concentrate on, technological development in the internet. Instead of talking about other aspects of the internet. So I like to concentrate on research and education aspect of the internet, and like to try to forecast what will happen 20 years from now. I agree with Chow Mok. I may not be here, but and I don't care about my prediction. Okay, so I've been involved. I'm not doing any research in future internet net research, but I keep following up the development, and the internet actually allowed me to do so because being in a country like Thailand, there's no research grant so that I can get involved in the future internet research. However, with the internet, I can follow up with what is happening, and I would like to share my knowledge with you regarding the future internet research. The reason why people are talking about future internet research today is because, actually for the past 5 years, because of these mobile devices that Maria just mentioned, and the mobility of people and devices that are occurring today. The internet that was designed in the 40 years ago cannot accommodate with all this movement. People are trying to address this mobility problem as part of the internet, the future internet architecture. And also, you also see that each user may have more than one devices, and each device may have many interfaces. So you are faced with mobility as well as multi-homing, and apart from that, people are using internet or your mobile devices for online banking or e-commerce and all kind of business transactions. So we need security to be embedded inside the internet itself. So all these prompt the researchers to address the internet architecture, and one group of researchers are taking what they call clean slate approach, which means that they have the freedom to think of the new internet without any constraint of the old internet. The old internet is the one we are using today. And there are another group of researchers that take the evolutionary approach, trying to fix the problems, trying to in order to accommodate in order to resolve the issues that we need to accommodate new demands on the internet. With these two tracks, which are ongoing, and they are very active in the US, in Europe, and also in Asia. And Asia, I would say, for North Asia, like China, Japan, Korea. This research is very active. They receive a lot of grants. However, I would like to predict from my own belief that no big fundamental change will take place 20 years from now. The reason why I am projecting this way, because as you could see from your own experience, whenever we try to change something at a change something at a fundamental level for the internet, like IPv6 or introducing the security for the DNS, it took us so many years, more than 10 years, and we still don't have, we still struggling with IPv6, we're still struggling with DNSSEC. Okay, so from this experience, I don't think the internet would change. There will not be a big fundamental change to the global internet. However, whatever the outcome from these big research projects will be embedded on existing internet. And to my belief, it will be the job of the IETF to patch everything and try to make all these new technologies, new networks to coexist, and they're not conflicting with one another or not conflicting with the normal internet. And so I think we don't have to be afraid of the big change to come. However, with all this internet, future internet network, results, I'm pretty sure that there will be very specialized network that takes place, and in answering to different, new demands of the users. With all this future internet, the cloud and tablets that are being distributed for education, I'm sure that the education for the children will change dramatically in the next 20 years. In my country, my government is distributing 100,000 tablets to school children. That would take place before June this year. So I really don't know how the children in my country will look like in 5 years from now. That is something we are worried because they have not prepared teachers. With this kind of environment, I'm sure we need to redefine the role of the teachers. We need to redefine the role of the school and also universities. And that has not yet been done. However, since this is a top-down activity, we'll see what happens. And I would welcome anyone who is interested in observing the result of this distribution of tablets. And I think that would change the learning activities of the young generation. And for universities, as my colleague Maria said, university will stay, and I believe so. And the university will stay, but the role of university would be redefined. And we, for the past 5 years or so, there's a lot of activities that are ongoing among research and education networks around the world, heavily supported by the European Union. So we are now very well connected. I mean, universities in different regions are now connected with one another through the research and education network. So from the infrastructure point of view and the technology point of view, we are ready to collaborate in terms of research across, among universities and in research institutes around the world. However, we don't know whether research collaboration would attract policy makers or not, because we are sharing big data, we are sharing secrets. So that is the unpredictable factor which I cannot predict. I think the research and education sector will change drastically due to all these changing environments, and to be better or worse, I'm not able to predict. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanchana, for highlighting these challenges to the research and education field. Our final speaker this afternoon, before we turn to discussion, is Burt Kaliski from Verisign. Burt, please.
Thank you very much, Bill. Following the pattern of age disclosure, I'm 48. I will be 68 in 20 years. And I would like to make a prediction. I predict that by the year 2032, the internet will be self-governing. Now, let me clarify what I mean. The Internet Society's President Don Heath, speaking in Geneva 15 years ago, spoke about the principle of self-governance for the internet, and by that he meant that the stakeholders, the society of the internet, would oversee itself. That's already here. What I am referring to is that in 20 years, the internet, the collection of interconnected computer systems, will be sufficiently capable for many parts to handle its own governance, to steer itself in accordance with the interests of its stakeholders. Let's just look back a little bit at the developments in computer performance during the 20-year history of the Internet Society. Top500.org began collecting statistics on supercomputer performance within a year or so after the formation of the Internet Society, June 1993. The first record holder was a connection machine at Los Alamos Labs with a measured maximum speed of 60 billion floating point operations per second, or 60 gigaflops. By the most recent measurement, November 2011, Fujitsu's Riken K computer measured at 10 petaflops. That's 10 million gigaflops. That's 200,000 times faster than at the beginning of the period. Over the history of the Internet society, nearly 6 orders of magnitude of improvement in the top speed of supercomputers. Now, we can measure computer performance in any number of ways, the personal computers or mobile devices that we carry with us, the aggregate computing capability, and so on. But by any even conservative measure of this ongoing exponential growth, however it may be achieved, we could expect to see at least another factor of 10,000 between now and the 2032 year being contemplated. What are we going to do with the other 9,999 additional units of compute power? Maybe they can be applied to the system itself, taking care of this all-important issue of governance. So it's technologically capable. It's also socially and economically essential because our global economy and our personal lives will depend so much on the internet in 20 years that we cannot handle it all ourselves by traditional human methods. We'll need the computers to help us to accomplish these objectives. The complexity, the interdependence will benefit from a little bit of assistance, some co-governance, if you will, in support of stakeholders' objectives. So what would a self-governing internet have to do? Well, first it would have to understand the objectives and the policies of its stakeholders, reconcile them with one another, suggest ways of addressing as much as possible with its own internal debate and deliberation, fulfill as effectively as it can, optimizing its use of resources along the way, verify that the properties have been achieved, and then convey that assurance again to the stakeholders. Recommend improvements, remediate. The compute capability will be there, the data infrastructure will be there. We're seeing it all built now. Systems will need to become more transparent and more accountable so that they can be composed toward a more autonomous goal. And just step back a moment and think of two of the words that we use so frequently in discussions like this: cyberspace and governance. They do have the same root, the Greek kuber, to steer. The game changer, the mini singularity, if you will come when the internet begins to steer itself and takes its own place at the table of internet governance on behalf of its 10 billion users. Thank you.
Thank you, Burt. That's certainly thought-provoking, and I think a good opportunity to turn to the panel and the audience to comment on what they've heard or put forward their own thoughts about what the internet might look like in 20 years and what will be the game changers. And I see Vint Cerf has his hand up very actively right off the bat.
Well, first of all, by 2032, we will be well off the planet in addition to everything else. But what I want to know, Burt, is who's going to be responsible for the bugs in the program when the internet takes over its own control, and it ain't going to be me.
Is that rhetorical?
No, it was a real question.
Right.
I mean, I'm seriously, no one has ever created software that doesn't have bugs, right? So, I mean, there may be small, little, tiny programs that could be absolutely proven, but anything as complex as the internet is going to have bugs. So the honest question is whether, in terms of transparency and accountability, who will take responsibility for the behavior of the net once you believe it is now responsible for its own future? There are bugs in there. They are our fault collectively, and I am serious about asking what we should do about it.
Two of the steps in self-governance that I outlined are verification and remediation. With some of that additional 10,000-fold capacity, we ought to be able to put better instances of both elements into systems that are being designed. Assuming that bugs occur, checking continuously, updating, and so on, and learning through the process. I agree with you, this is a difficult achievement, but software development, as usual, will need to be improved.
So, Mr. Chairman, I apologize for monopolizing here. One important thing to remember is that more computing power does not necessarily give you a more effective consequence. I will say that statistical methods have been our friend, along with increased computing power. So Bayes' theorem underlies an awful lot of what we do at Google and elsewhere. So I will give you the possibility that with good models and Bayesian logic, we might actually be able to catch some of the problems. But I think we should be thoughtful about this.
Good, thank you. Well, in this second set, I think we heard a lot about the impact of the internet and what it will probably bring about in the education sectors, in the governance sectors, in the economy. We heard quite a bit about the benefits that mobility will bring, including even suggestions that with enough mobility and enough data traffic, we may not need to travel anymore to see things. We heard about the evolution of universities, and also the possibility of really the internet becoming a co-governor of itself. So among all those thoughts, I'd like to see if anyone on the panel has any comments they'd like to bring forward. Maria, please.
Something I just noticed as everybody was talking, that especially the first group of people, I think everybody touched off the subject of youth involvement in ICTs and how important it's going to be, and that in 20 years also it's going to be the youth of today involved in ICT who will be, I think, the future leaders, I think was the phrase was used earlier. I always feel compelled to kind of bring this to the table because I always notice that I'm one of the youngest people at these kind of meetings, and I feel honoured, but at the same time that there should be more people like me who should be just involved, and we need to do something instead of just talking about it. There needs to be more companies getting involved right now about how do we actually bring more young people here. I think the big question was that Titi said at the very start that will the youth in 20 years still be having this exact same discussion?
I see Khaled here, please.
Yeah, thank you. I like the Burt new version of Internet self-governing itself. My question, in fact, is that today we have the Internet as a human using computers or any hand to connect to other humans. How do you think will look like this governance when it will come to billions of things connected to each other using IPv6, knowing that the nanotechnology will reduce these things to very small connected thing to thing. How do you think will be the governance of this human-machine relationship?
At least for the next 20 years, for the most part, humans will still be creating the systems. So in the creation of the system by the human, there is an intent, a design objective that can be expressed into the system that then manages the various components, whether it's a swarm of intelligent components, it's sensors, automobiles interacting with each other. Design intent and policy are building blocks for effective governance. The governance also, per one of the earlier panelists' comments, can have some centralized nature, but it is most effectively done in a distributed fashion and therefore has more of a logarithmic scale to it. Each small community of components operating semi-autonomously and yet some collaborative cross-system monitoring to look at the overall implications of the interactions between these systems.
Thank you, and I want to apologize. I haven't been thinking. I've been lucky in knowing the first few interveners from the floor, but as we move forward, I'd like you to introduce yourselves when I call on you for a question. And I see someone back here, and then Olivier, and then next we'll go to the remote participants and see if there are any questions from cyberspace. Thank you.
My name is Vikram Kumar from Internet New Zealand. What if the game changer is negative? So we've had all of this positive, forward-looking, and hope that things will turn out well. What do the panel see as a negative game changer? And what would the impact on the Internet be in that case? Thank you.
Titi, would you like to address that?
Yes, I just for clarity's sake, I think I did mention one possibly negative game changer in terms of having the internet being governed in such a way that it's completely irrelevant whatever it is that policy says. A bit of a state where we have more people who are engaged with using the internet for a whole range of reasons and have become even more expert than they currently are in sidestepping whatever policies or regulations exist. That is a negative game changer that I see very much. It's happening now, and it's only going to get better. One of the experiences I had recently is I have a godson who's just going to be 2 in June, and he's very apt at using the iPad. Doing the fingers, has all the motions in place, but he doesn't have his spoken language as yet. He can't form sentences. But he's so good with using this technology. Now put that young man in a space where he's become very adept at using technology and has what is termed negative knowledge and is not harnessed in the right way. And he's able to circumvent, like you have people being able to circumvent some of the firewalls in China, in Hong Kong. Now that is something that we very much are facing, and it will get bigger. Our policies tend to lag behind technology. It will get worse, and it will get to the point where technology happens and policy is still trying to do catch-up as long as we continue to do policy the way we currently do policy.
Thanks. Demi, you had a comment as well, I think.
That's very short. I think that the provisions here is not all optimistic. Maybe we will try to keep the internet free as open as it is now, because as a matter of fact, the internet grew in an unharmed way, basically because many of the actors were late in noticing the growing of the internet, and now you have all these people in the arena, and the scene is a little bit different. And just to add a comment about the Kaliski excellent achievement about the word. We have this problem inherent in the story, because cyber, as he said, comes from control, from the Greek word kyvernesis, the word for govern. Then cyberspace is the space of control, the space of government. And I don't remember exactly when this word came from control theory to the computer theory. I remember Pierre Levy coined the cyber culture. This is a kind of oxymoron in itself, because cyber culture is a mixture of culture and control. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. So, Olivier, please, and then we'll go to the remote.
Thank you very much, Bill. Olivier Crépin-Leblanc. I'm with the ISOC England chapter, but I'll be speaking on my behalf. I'm going to be a little bit controversial, maybe, as one does. I really thank the panel for displaying so much optimism and happiness. But being an angry Frenchman with a blood that boils way too easily, I feel compelled to play devil's advocate in this forum. And the question I would like to ask the panel, and perhaps also everyone around the room, and for them to share it with their communities back home, is how do you reconcile a traditional top-down government governance model with a bottom-up governance model that the internet was built on? Because unless you manage to reconcile this, then I'm afraid that all of your predictions for the future will not come true. Thank you.
You always have the easy questions, Olivia. Titi again, I think, and others.
Okay, maybe because this is one of my favorite topics. Why should the concept be reconciled? In as much as it's the easiest thing sometimes to try to make the old fit with the new or the new fit in with the old, there's a saying that I like: you can't fit new wine in old wineskins. It spoils it. So maybe where we need to be is not trying to fit the concept of governance as we currently have it, but rather take this new entity that has refused to fit in any of our existing models and look at it in a creative way. How can we make it work the way it's worked so far? What structures can we put in place for the self-growing, the self-governing system that we have in place? How can you look at how hacking communities currently are able to work together with their nefarious activities and work really well? How can you look at how the Facebook community has been able to grow based on word of mouth and look at how we can use that as a governance system? So rather than trying to reconcile the old and the new, which we can continue to do, and for the next 20 years, my child is going to sit here and probably ask the same questions, having been brought up by me. The point is, look for a new system of governance and not try to fit a marriage that really will not work.
Charles, please, and then David.
Yes, first of all, very quickly, Titi, there's no firewall in Hong Kong, at least not while the ISOC Hong Kong is around. It won't be so easy. Olivier's point about reconciling, actually, that's exactly why I talk about the conflict. And actually, Bill used the word tension. But I think both sides may end up having to learn it the hard way at some point and find the equilibrium later on. We talk about multi-stakeholderism a lot during these couple of days, but what I see is that some people want to be among the stakeholders more than others. Some, especially I mentioned about those with power, those with political, economic, social power, and others. So just like what we've seen all along in other ways, other things in society, some are more equal than others. So I have a worry that this is not what our next generation would like to see and accept. And there will be conflicts. And maybe after conflicts, there will be reconciliation. But I don't think it would be a smooth thing forward.
Thanks, Charles. David, you wanted to say something as well.
Thank you, Bill. I really don't think that we sitting here today can look at those issues 20 years from now and say, what will it be like then? I'd like to come back to what Maria said about the youth of today, or what Titi talked about in terms of children being born today who will grow up with the internet, or even children born within the last 10 years, who don't recall a time when there was no internet. These are the people who will find solutions because they are children of the internet. And I don't think we will have them. But I'm confident that they will find a way because it matters so much in the future.
And Demi, one last comment on this one.
Yeah, just to rephrase, maybe the conflict is not between government and social society or bottom-up or top-down, but between status quo and innovation. This will be in all areas, not just in government versus society.
Good, thank you. I have a couple of names here in the room, but I'd really like to see if there's anything on the remote.
Well, in fact, there is a lot. We have 5 questions. Should it take 2 for now? Okay. So the first question is from Kabani from Pakistan, and he asks, what is the role of United Nations on the governance of Internet in the next 20 years?
I tend to be the one that takes Okay, what will the role of the United Nations be in the next 20 years? One of the first questions that pops to my head is, what will the UN like to do? Apart from putting itself in a place where it wants to take over control, which literally it's not equipped to do. I think what I'd like to see, where I'd like to see the UN within the governance system is where it realizes that it needs to play, it's a different field, and it needs to play in a different way. In a different way in that the people being governed, or that they seek to govern or participate in governing, are not just observers. I made a comment recently on a mailing list, and I said that the status quo where within the UN system, the people who are actually closest to the masses are given observer status. Life is not about observing, it's about participating. And one of the greatest things that I appreciate about the internet is the fact that it's a leveler. So yes, if the UN wants to play in the internet ecosystem over the next 20 years, or in 20 years' time, it has to realize that it's participatory and not observatory.
Thank you. Second question?
Okay, we will do some editing because two questions came based on Vince's speech. So the first one is from Jolie McPhee from Isaac, New York. I've heard Vint often say the internet or whatever replaces it. What might replace it? And the other one, based on the same speech, came from the DC Isaac chapter. So whose software will manage the autonomous net? Verisign, Verisign, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Red Hat, and so on.
Okay, Burt, and then I'll give the right of reply to Vint if you like.
There are some 20-year-olds who haven't been born yet who will write the software. But the point being, you, the internet users, have incredible tools. The first generation to be so well equipped and so well connected. Surely you as the internet users, we all together as the internet users, can make these changes happen as effectively as we'd like.
So it's Vint, and Burt, I agree with you here. I think that we still have an extraordinarily malleable system from which emerging properties are still coming out. We have the ability to, this is an artifact, we have the ability to change the artifact. I'm still a little nervous about the artifact that changes itself in ways that we can't quite predict, and then we don't know what the consequences of that are. But in fact, either the internet will evolve to meet our needs, or something else will come along to do that. Because in the end, it met needs that were unmet 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So I don't think we can just sit back and relax. I think we still have not only incumbent upon us, but we have the opportunity before us to adapt and create to make these kinds of artificial systems meet the needs that we discover.
Okay, David wanted to make a quick point on this, and then I'll turn to Jayantha. I think you want to loop back, perhaps.
I'd like to respond to the remote question on what will the internet become. I think what it becomes, and I don't think we have a clear answer today, but will be determined by three things. One is IPv6, and as the level of connectivity goes up around the world, incredibly more than it is now. The second is the children who are born with the internet, who will come into play with regard to its future. And the third will be the end of the digital divide. If every person on the earth is connected, the nature of the internet will change dramatically. But more importantly, people's perception of the internet will change dramatically because everybody is engaged. These three things will determine what the internet will become.
Thank you. And Jayantha?
My response is also to that question from the remote participant with regard to the role of the UN in relation to the future of the internet. Well, I feel the UN, like any other organization, will have to adapt itself to the evolution of the internet. and its success in how best it can be part of the internet process will be, in my opinion, defined by how well the UN itself adapts to the whole multi-stakeholder model. Thank you.
Thank you. And Charles, quickly.
Very quickly on the UN issue question again. I think to many of us in the world, UN itself is dysfunctional. I think it's better for them to fix themselves first.
Okay. Next question I have is from Raul here, please, in the front.
I cannot leave this meeting without using the translation services, so I will speak in Spanish. The way I think that those services are very important, and so the way to convince the people to continue investing in offering and providing translation services is just using them.
One of the comments I would like to make has to do with the issue of language as well. Many things have been said that are interesting, and I will not be repeating them, but I think technology will evolve greatly in the next 20 years. In 10 years' time, I think we will have systems for translation or interpretation in real time that will allow us to connect and communicate through the networks without taking into account one language we all speak, or read content in different languages in real time as we wish. I think that will definitely empower communication at a global level, and probably before 20 years' time we'll have different devices that will allow us to generate a lot of opportunities of integrating different ways of communication, including different human being possibilities. I think in this sense there are two very important things. What are we going to do with all that technology that will be available to us? Because how are we going to do to use those technologies and reduce inequalities, for example? The most developed countries will be able to use better technology, because the more technology we have available, then the bigger the differences will be. And therefore the main challenge is, what will we do to use that amazing technology we'll have and use it to reduce inequalities and not increase them. And the other thing I wanted to comment has to do with governance. Governance, I think, in the internet, I think is rather irrelevant. I agree with what Demi has said. Before internet disappears before our eyes, we won't see it in 20 years' time. It will be incorporated in everything of our daily use. And I think there is something that is basic, and that is that more and more human beings, as most of the global population gains access to communication technologies, whether that is the internet or other, people will have more opportunities to express their opinions. And therefore, as we said in the opening session, the multi-stakeholder models will be developing more and more, and they will be more used in different areas. And I think the most important thing, and I think it has been mentioned slightly in the most recent interventions, is how this will involve, this pressure on current political systems. And I think maybe not in the next 20 years, but in the next 10 and the following 10 and 20 years, so in 30 or 40 years' time, we'll see a great pressure for the revision of current political systems in order to be able to reevaluate the different systems of participation that everybody in the world will want to have, and as well they will have the tools to carry it out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raul. So I heard a couple of main questions there. One about what will the potentials be for technology to reduce inequality, given all these amazing developments we're expecting in the next 20 years. And secondly, about the nature of governance when people can express themselves and communicate more freely. that will put pressure on political systems, and what will the impact of that be? So I'll toss that out to the panel and see if anyone wants to comment on either of those. Demi, please.
Some initial words. I think technology can increase the gap between who can do technology and who cannot do technology. But I think technology will reduce the gap for the users in general, because the entry barrier will be lower. We saw this in the internet. You can build a TV station in minutes without having to spend millions of dollars compared to the old broadcasting system and so. Then I am very optimistic in that aspect, that technology is not a problem for diminishing the desigualties in the world, but on the other hand, it's a way to create less barriers to be in. And just to take a little bit on your last question, the government is as a creation in a hierarchical structure, exactly because it's difficult to measure the opinions of the population all the times. Maybe with the internet and the voice you give to all human beings in this network, you really have to have a new kind of representation, not so static or not so punctual like is now, but more dynamic, reflecting the changing views all the time and trying to get all the opinions on that. Thank you.
Titi?
Okay. With due respect to both Demi and Raul, you're both gentlemen that I really respect, but I want to disagree with the fundamental thing that you both seem to agree on, the concept that, like electricity, will become irrelevant who controls or governs the internet. Part of why there's such a furrow today is because he who plays the piper dictates the tune. So whoever is able to, in some way, govern the internet will have a greater role to play. They will be able to literally control everything. If I cast my mind to some of the movies we've seen in recent times, you can imagine if your home, your bed, your food, your refrigerator, everything is controlled by this amazing technology that allows different things to talk to each other. My question is that at a certain point, the person or the group of institutions or the individuals who have the power to manage, control, govern, whatever word you want to use, this backbone will have a lot of power in 20 years. And rather than saying that it will completely disappear, I would rather say that it would become even more at the fore of our minds on who is the person who has the ability to take me off the grid. Not the electrical grid, but the internet grid. I think that will become even more important. But said in the vein that people will, or the users will become even more creative in their ways to be able to circumvent any attempts at control. I think that's where we will be in 20 years. And on the second level, I think actually I see a lot of, by 2032, increased inequality. It's a fact. There will be increased inequality. Why do I say this? Because the people who are in this room care about the internet. But for every single person in this room who cares about the internet is probably 4 or 5 more people. And increasingly, you're seeing those kind of communities emerge across different continents. You are going to get to the point where, by choice, people will choose not to engage with the internet or with technology. On the second level is the fact that you're going to have a generation of people who are not really interested in knowing how it works. They just want to be able to use it. So inequality will come, but it will come in a different level to what we understand it right now as, in terms of access. It will come in terms of what do I really want to do with it, and do I really need it at all?
Okay, I see a bit of a conversation starting to shape up here. David, please comment.
I think I'm responding to Raul in terms of political identities and so on. I think as more and more people engage with the internet, except for the islands who choose not to, national identities will diminish, and people will look more and more at the globe as their opportunity and in terms of what they're doing. Countries' economies will get meshed with the internet as, the percentage of GDP that happens online goes up. That's one trend. At the other end, you look at young people even today. If I take the case of my daughter, compared to when I was young and my identity as an Indian and my relationship with the rest of the world, when I look at her, she's far more a global citizen than I was at that age. She views herself as a global citizen first from India, not the other way around. And this will become increasingly the case in future. So political systems may not have hard outlines in future. It'll soften. And I think the internet will help do that. And systems of governance as we know today, like the United Nations, will also diminish. And perhaps something entirely new will emerge. It's possible.
Okay, we have a fairly lengthy queue here. I'd like to take the gentleman from Sri Lanka here, then we'll go to the remotes. Then I have Olaf and Vint, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. There's one thing, before I left Sri Lanka, I received an email, and it said that the United States is poised to pass a new law that would permit US agents to spy on almost everything we do online. So anyway, I think it's happening right now. But so I signed this petition before I left. My worry is that for many thousands of years, that we are territorial. We humans tend to be territorials, and that's why there are countries, whether it's a village or otherwise. My fear that how noble it is, the internet. The pioneers had done it to make it connected together global. But we will try to carve out on the internet territorial these aspirations that we have. So that part of the things that's what it will be a new territorial game that will create. And I know that there's a lot of research going on even in my university. We are trying to see correcting, as you pointed out, and the research is going into that we can connect internet without, that means if there is any problem that will identify and it correct itself. In order for us to actually go out of this territory, I would think one day internet will govern us rather than our trying to govern internet. So I think that's what will happen eventually. If that happens, that we will have this whatever that we have this to be territorial will go away. I'm sorry that I have to be very pessimistic here.
Thank you. I'll take that as a comment and move to the remote moderator.
The question is from Shiva in India. Does the challenge lie in converting the traditional top-down politics to the internet's bottom-up model?
Any comment on that? No? Oh, Maria, please.
I just have a short reply to that. It was actually Olivier, actually, who said this to me yesterday, and it was a very interesting thought, that the entire concept of having everybody involved, the actual challenge of this is how do you bring everybody here to get them involved. So before actually discussing how that can be accomplished, we first address the issue, I guess, again, a bit of a mobility of who is going to bring these stakeholders here to actively participate. So I think that's the first question that no matter what always has to be approached first.
Is there another comment from online?
Yeah, we have one from Alejandro in Spain. What do you think the impact of the economic crisis will be on IPv6 deployment? Will it slow the internet's growth in the next years?
Does anyone have a quick take on that? Vint in the audience, please.
I don't believe that it will have a very massive impact. The necessity for getting to V6 is, in my view, increasingly overwhelming. It's the only way that the net can grow. And the costs of doing it are not overwhelming at all. So I don't think that this fiscal situation is necessarily going to drive that problem. Equipment is available, software is available, the edges are already enabled. It's a question of turning things on. So I don't see that as a particular inhibitor.
Okay. from the floor, I have Olaf, and then I think Vint had a comment, and then I have one over here, please. So,
Olaf Kolkman. I've been listening to the conversation, and we're predicting futures. We have this concept, what we today call the internet, and in 20 years it might be completely different. It might not be a packet-based network. We're not talking about IPv6. We're talking about the next technology. It might not be DNS. It might be a completely different naming scheme. The technology has the whole technology substrate might have differed. What is the core property? And I do have one answer to it, but I want to ask the panelists. What is that core property that is being maintained over all these years, which will make us call that thing of the future internet? And the answer that I have, or at least part of that answer, because I don't think there is a unique part of it, but one of that elements is something that the ISOC people have phrased as permissionless innovation. The ability to hook up at the edge of the internet with your great idea. But I'd like to get the panel's opinion. What is it? What is the property that we should maintain over the next 20 years?
Any takers on that? Titi and Maria, please.
The freedom to innovate, the continued freedom to connect, and the right to continue to speak and be heard.
Thanks, and Maria, and then Burt.
I'd actually say something slightly controversial of, I think the core that we need to think about is the right to be left alone and the right to actually not use the internet and the right to be excluded from it is no matter what, it's a very important factor that will continue.
Thank you, and Burt.
Something that goes much longer into the past than 20 years or even 20 decades, and that's human relationships. Enabling and empowering humans to do what they can do best.
Thank you, and I think Khaled, you had a quick comment on the same one, and then I'll move up here.
It's a quick answer, if I may, to Olaf. I think what we should preserve is the user-centric internet, the capacity of the user to choose what content on what networks or whatever equipment to use, whatever available.
Okay, then a gentleman up here has a comment or question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I will be brief, but yes, I want to say something what we about the role could have the international organizations. All the international organizations are concerning by internet, but maybe twice or three are more concerning than the others because they have mandate on telecommunication or intellectual properties. But the international organizations are or special accord with the UN. And the UN, what is it? It is the international law. It is the international legislations. But what we need, what we are talking since yesterday, day before yesterday, is more legal framework, which is very useful globally and locally. I want to say that on e-health, which be very useful for the future, e-health and healthcare, but it doesn't mean necessarily biotech, which is also linked with the internet. We are optimists, of course, thinking for the future. But what I didn't raise during the opening roundtable, I want to raise right now, and I don't want to ask, but I prefer invite you to thinking with me. Yes, territorial and governments. What changed since 20 years ago? Government. Before, the government department, telecommunications. But since 20 years ago, a role of regulatory authorities, it's very important, which is more than a government. But what my hope, which relationship we can have the internet community, we will have another relationship with a regulator in the future. And I stop here.
Thank you. I have a queue running here of 4, I think. So let's start with Vint, and we'll work through that before coming back to the panel for closing comments. I think our time is running down. Vint, please.
This is a reference to a story that was written almost 100 years ago by E.M. Forster. This story is titled "The Machine Stops." And it's about a society which is completely and totally dependent on a machine which feeds them. They never leave the house. They interact with each other remotely. And one day it doesn't work anymore. And the question, of course, is what happens? How do people survive? And so on. So those of you who wonder what would happen, what the world would be like without the internet, might read that story and then give some thought to it. As far as getting off the net is concerned, generally speaking, there are prices to pay for extracting yourself from the commonly used infrastructure of our modern society. I think it's possible to extract yourself from the grid, but there will be a cost, and I don't know exactly all of the price, but sometimes it will be harder to do that than other times.
Thank you. I think Patrice, please.
Yes, I'd like to take up the question about what would be the core principle. Having worked on the internet now for many, many, many years, and last night they had the ceremony honoring the pioneers. And one of the core principles, Bob Kahn, when he started to work in the early days in DARPA, that has stood the test of time, and I would hope would continue for many years, is the concept of the open architecture. We have this global information system. Oftentimes there's a tendency to reify it, like you plug it into the wall, rather than having this global information system with policies and procedures that are widely known and adopted in some open, transparent fashion. And that open architecture, anyone that wants to participate can, because they know what the rules are. That doesn't mean that the information that's made available is open, because there might be public, private. That's a different situation. But it's the open architecture, I think, and I would hope that would continue forward.
Thank you. And right at the very back on the corner there, please.
Thank you, Eric Iriarte. I will speak in English. Well, it's the first time. I don't know where we'll be in 20 years, but I really know that in 20 years, my daughter will have 32. And she will ask me what I am doing to preserve the internet that I am using now. So the first thing that I am clear, if not possible to continue only discussing these kind of things alone and only in our internal circles. We need to go in where is the discussions with the governments and stay in that discussion day by day. It's not possible to continue talking between us because we are evangelizated yet. We need to be voice of the people that don't have voice right now.
Thank you. So we're running low on time. I have a question or comment from Walda, and then I'll turn to the panel for just 60 seconds each as we close. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is very interesting, and maybe this is late in the conversation to introduce it. But even Titi's baby is going to be trained in a keypad-based internet world. And I would be interested to know whether you think that in 20 years we might find ourselves in a very different internet in that it will be natural language-based conversation and driven by human direct interaction with a computer.
Thank you for that. I will start through the panel in the opposite direction to the way we started originally and invite you to comment on that or make a concluding remark, but please do try and stay within about a minute, please. So, Burt.
Thank you. It's a good amount of information to consider, and remember that we all, the 2 billion internet users today, the 10 billion yet to come, are the stakeholders who are making this happen. So with the principles of open architecture and with this amazing set of technology that we've discovered, we've been given, however it's come to us, there's so much ahead, and I'm excited to be part of it.
Kanchana?
Yes. Okay. What I would like to to say to internet community for the next 20 years is that if we would like to live peacefully, we need to try to balance the bottom up and the top down, approaches. Because, for example, in my country, our internet was developed from bottom up, but it was going very slowly. But once the government started to understand and they can put in, some big funding, and we can move very fast. So I really think that the young internet people need to strive for the balance between both, top down and bottom up. Maybe I'm a Buddhist, so we take the middle path. Thank you.
Maria?
I'm sorry.
As a final thought, I think I'd just like to respond to Walda's comment there of that it seems like a wonderful idea of the future internet truly being driven by human conversation. And I think it is conversations like these that actually do go back again and cause that same interaction. How many blogs and how many, if you look at Twitter right now, how many hashtags are being created specifically for this? Hopefully it's a lot. But I think it's conversations like these, and hopefully it will drive it for the next 20 years.
Thank you. David?
Thank you, Bill. I really don't think we've even begun to understand the power of the internet. As I said earlier, I think the internet itself is the game changer, and its power will be unleashed when all those who are not engaged with it now engage with it, when the children of the internet grow up and shape it, and with IPv6 coming in, and with more and more devices connected to it, I think we will see something that we couldn't even begin to imagine. Thank you.
Thank you. Demi, please.
Yeah. I hope that we can keep the internet as it is. It's now an amazing collection of thousands of networks that cooperate voluntarily on that. And over this very solid structure, we see so many amazing applications building in. And I hope for the best of us that the voice of the people can be more and more heard about over the internet. And just to make a comment on Burt, I just want to remember you that HAL 9000 was wrong. Then we have to be so careful on that. Thank you.
Charles, please.
Yes, as I was listening here about talks about governance, technology direction, I suddenly thought of another angle that we haven't talked much about so far this afternoon, trust. We're talking about authority, we're talking about the information there, but we haven't talked so much about how to establish trust in the future of the internet. And I think that's actually a reason why some people might be calling for more top-down authority. But still, I just want to end with a couple of questions here to all of you to think about, why do we want to trust, and who are we trusting, and what? I think that also has quite a bit of implications for our future internet.
Thank you. Jayantha?
Thank you, Bill. Bill, this has been an amazing panel, and I think I learned a lot from the audience as much as from the panel, and help our governments to react better to the changes in the trends that we may see going forward. But I just have 3 points to make. I agree with Kanchana on the middle path approach coming from a Buddhist country itself to handle the tensions between the bottom-up versus the top-down approach. Secondly, from a more governmental perspective, I would like to see that there is a better harmonization or globally interoperable standards in relation to cybersecurity and cybercrime policies, in the same way that we see a fantastic interoperable framework in relation to the internet itself and how it functions and how it has helped to grow. Finally, I'd like to borrow from speech that my friend Helmut Glacier made at the ICANN meeting in San Jose, where his version of I Have a Dream, where he said at some point that I have a dream, to quote from him, and work towards a truly universal and a self-regulated internet, and that is my dream too. Thank you.
And finally, Titi, please.
Thank you, Bill. First, to refer to Wilder's comments really quickly, I do not see that human language will disappear. It will have less of a prominent place to play, but I think the medium will change. Even as it's changed in the last 10 years, that we've seen a whole lot more interaction using mediums like Twitter, Facebook, etc., it'll get to a level where that will completely change. So in 20 years, yes, I might have to learn a new language to be able to interact with my young person, where all right is not just spelled as O-L-R-A-I-T anymore, but as something completely different. For my concluding remarks, in 2032, I see an engaged and innovating older generation, made up of myself and a whole bunch of other people here. Finally, not youth anymore. And then I see an ever-evolving, younger and creative a generation that has grown up in an environment where they know their rights and they stand up for it in a very vocal way. But in looking to the future, reality plays a key role. And the reality is that openness is key to all aspects of the internet: the technical, the content, the governance. Therefore, for me, a key game changer in 2032 or by 2032 will be our collective ability to continue to protect while enhancing our capability to be open in everything that concerns not just the internet, but the entire society as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. And as your moderator, I'm going to claim 60 seconds myself to thank this very thoughtful, active, and engaged panel, and also our audience for this excellent discussion. I want to thank our two remote moderators and all of the remote participants in hubs and online, the interpreters, the scribes, and the camera operators for your contribution to the session. So please give yourselves all a hand.